Often a study with the methods section will start with a design subsection. For the work I usually do, we don't usually need a design subsection. We can jump right into a participants subsection. So again, this is the subsection of the methods section. Some people call it a sample section, but usually in psychology we call it participants. And in the old days, people called it the subjects section. But we don't really use that word very often anymore unless we absolutely need to, because it kind of dehumanizes the person. An example of a participant's subsection of a method section would be this. Something like 300 people were asked to complete the survey as they exited their cars and walked on campus one day. And you can read the rest here, so take a moment to do that and push pause. The participants section or subsection includes the sampling procedure. You may not know what that is at this point, but a lot of psychology studies and sociology use convenience samples. That means you find a group of people who are just easy to find, like classes of students are considered a convenience sample. There are other types like snowball, quota, and other types of sampling that you can learn about later if you don't already know about them. The participants section also includes recruitment strategies. Where were the participants recruited and how were they recruited and who recruited them? So did you walk up to students on campus as they exited their cars? That's sort of an absurd example that we rarely do. Usually it's something like a survey was distributed in class by undergrad research assistants. You want to put your criteria for inclusion and exclusion. When you were recruiting people, who did you include or exclude? Did you know you would only accept people who were 18 and over and you asked them right away as they were coming up from the car, for example? You need to include the total number of participants that were recruited and the total number of non-responders. So let's say you have 300 people that you recruited, but let's say 50 of them for some reason didn't actually respond to all or some of the data. Perhaps you would call it 250 people then in your sample. So be sure to include how many refused to participate, how many participants provided data that was incomplete or not usable, and did these people differ from the study participants? So you can write something in your report, but probably not more than a sentence or two about that part if you think there's a difference in who participated and who didn't. You want to also mention whether there's incentives given for participation. So if you're sure that course credit was given for people who participated in a survey, you can list that. If you're sure that participants were given money if they completed a survey or participated in the study, then you'd want to mention that. Another section is the procedure subsection. We call it subsection. And it usually covers activities that happened after the participants were recruited into the study. So what happened when, say, a survey distributor was with the participants? Where were the surveys distributed and who distributed them? In this section, you can mention whether your survey or other methods were peer report, self-report, combination of procedures. I usually will say something like students completed a paper and pencil survey in their classrooms. We also want to mention who distributed the surveys and administered a treatment. If you're doing a survey study, you really don't have a treatment administered. But you might be saying the authors of this paper rehearsed data collection procedures and then administered the survey to participants. So administering a survey is different from administering a treatment. I'll talk about that in a moment. How is the data kept anonymous or confidential? Usually in studies that we do with students, I find we don't usually need their name or any identifying information. So it's usually anonymous and confidential. I don't usually let people write their names on the surveys or put their birth dates, for example, so that it can be anonymous and confidential. You might think about what you know about ethics. Why is it helpful to have anonymous and confidential? So you can think about that. In experimental research, where researchers are doing a true experiment, they need to report more information about what was going on in their method. They need to state what was received by the participants or what was experienced by the participants in the control group, if there was one, and in the experimental group. So a typical statement might be the experimental group received the new drug and the control group received a sugar pill placebo. If it were truly that simple, maybe that's all that would be needed in the procedure section with a little more information. Again, usually in classes I work with, we're not writing a course report on an experiment. We're conducting a relational study.